This ornate tin bread box contains the ingredients of an incredible World War II story. The container and its artifacts were always off limits until a prying young son opened the lid on his father's top secret life.
I was curious, and as a 5-year-old, I decided that I wanted to get access to it. So I snuck into it and lifted with my fingertips the rolled edge of it and popped it open. And I was stunned at what I saw. Inside it were numbers of different passports of different countries with my dad's picture on each one of them, but a different name. And there were codes, small pieces of paper in code. There were silk maps. There also was a .45 with 4 clips that was there. There were many French documents, and they had my dad and a different name and his photograph, and they were coupons and stamps and IDs, and it fostered my curiosity to find out what the real story was.
Jean-Claude Guillet came from a region in northeastern France about 15 miles from the Swiss border. His home was roughly an hour and a half from Zurich, Switzerland. Jean-Claude's goal when he was young was to move to the United States.
My father was born in Belfort, and that's where his mother was from, a small village just south of Belfort. And so he was born as a French citizen and experienced most of his early childhood in France. My father's dream was to be an American.
That dream came true in the early 1930s when Jean-Claude's parents took jobs at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. They were returning to America to teach French.
My grandfather, René, headed the French department for 35 years. René and Jean met as exchange students when they were both at the University of Illinois just after the end of World War I.
Jean-Claude Guillet grew up in an academic environment in Northampton, Massachusetts. The weather in New England was like his old home in eastern France. In America, French remained the dominant language for the Guillet family. In 1942, Jean-Claude left home for college in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
When he was 17, he started Harvard, and he was flunking out. And so he was really relieved when he got a draft notice in the mail in the winter in March of 1943.
Realizing a dream, Jean-Claude Guillet became an American citizen in 1943. Guillet enjoyed his early days in the Army in South Carolina.
And he loved basic.
Jean-Claude wanted to be a paratrooper.
One day he was pulled off of the firing range and then immediately went to a parachute school.
Jean-Claude Guillet's stay at Fort Bragg in North Carolina was brief. A new top-secret organization had already pinpointed Guillet for a new role in World War II. The Office of Strategic Services, led by an imaginative director named Wild Bill Donovan, was already working to bring chaos and death to the enemy in occupied Europe. Guillet would eventually get to parachute back into his native France. Just not as an American soldier.
Before he got a jump in, Wild Bill Donovan from Washington, D.C. sent a man down and picked him up, and next thing he knew, he was on a train with a packed duffel and ended up in Washington, D.C. with a group called OSS that he had no idea what they were about.
The Office of Strategic Services, America's first ever centralized intelligence agency, sought out anyone with knowledge of France or the ability to speak flawless French.
All they wanted to do was to verify that his French was fluent and very passable, which it obviously was. And They signed him up.
The OSS put Jean-Claude through grueling physical and mental instruction. It included shooting, unarmed combat, guerrilla tactics, Morse code transmission, and covert communications. They also made Jean-Claude sign something called the Official Secrets Act. He couldn't talk about anything he was doing. Jean-Claude's brother Peter had also joined the OSS. The two had to pretend they didn't know each other as they went through rigorous instruction and training.
Some of the training was frightening and scary, and he was there for 4 months when he completed it. My father's first training in America with OSS was an introductory course of shooting and knifing and demolition, and wireless sending, Morse code, encoding, decoding, and it was hard.
Following graduation from the Office of Strategic Services, Jean-Claude Guillet was handed a surprise. The OSS had loaned the American to their British counterpart, the more established and ultra-top-secret spy and sabotage agency called Special Operations Executive, or SOE. Jean-Claude Guillet arrived in England in January 1944.
When he was shipped over to England, and he was attached to SOE, they had 2 more years of experience of putting clandestine operators into foreign occupied lands. And about 1/3 of these agents couldn't handle the training and had flunked out.
Jean-Claude Guillet became one of SOE's best radio operators. He could encode and decode messages quickly and accurately under extreme pressure. What Jean-Claude also learned was that radio operators were the first SOE agents to be captured, tortured, and killed by the enemy.
Every agent was given a choice to take what they call an L pill with them. And the L pill stood for lethal. It was potassium cyanide. And so you had the choice to either stand up to the torture if you were captured and resist all you could and give your last ounce of dedication and energy and courage until you were dead, or you could take your L pill.
Training in Scotland and England focused on additional Morse code work, gathering intelligence, and how to kill or maim your enemy. All of Jean-Claude Guillet's skills were needed immediately. He would be joining 3 other SOE agents preparing for an upcoming top-secret mission.
He was rushed through because they already had him assigned to this team from early on for the wireless operator, and that's what they wanted. And before he knew what really was going on, he was signing his will.
It's part of the mystique of that individual that even throughout his whole life, he never told his family what he did.
The German army conquered France quickly in 1940. The Nazis had an occupied zone in the north, west, and east of the country. In the central and southern part of France was the Vichy section, French, who collaborated with the Germans. There was no such thing as a formal French resistance from 1940 into 1942. Early opposition by civilians was unorganized, underground, and in the shadows.
I was surprised in my research by just how little resistance there was at the beginning of the occupation. At first, barely anybody belonged to the French resistance. If you belonged to the French resistance, it was a very nerve-wracking experience because you could be informed on at any moment, and many people were. So what was the knock at the door? You know, was it your neighbor? Was it a German officer? They didn't want to collaborate, but they didn't want to resist. It meant your death and the death of your family, probably 100 other people would be killed when the SS captured you or the Gestapo captured you.
In the early days of World War II, with Europe occupied and the attack on Pearl Harbor still down the road for the United States, the British government, fighting alone, needed a way to hit back at the Germans. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill supported an idea of secret groups of specialized Allied agents who would cause chaos in big cities, small villages, and countries such as France. Churchill's order for them was to set Europe ablaze. The Allies called it resistance. The Germans branded it as terrorism.
The idea of the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, was basically to bring the battle to the Germans within occupied territories. So it was Churchill who came up with the idea right after the total occupation of Europe, minus England, of course, and he knew at this point that he had to play dirty and basically form this new organization called the Special Operations Executive by sending in secret agents within occupied territories to sabotage, create unrest, mess up communication.
Churchill was desperate to buy time, and he needed something that would slow the Nazis.
The term set Europe ablaze was to disrupt the Nazi regime.
The missions handed out by the British SOE would become much more targeted as the war progressed. SOE agents' lifespans were measured in just weeks. Planners called their missions suicide operations. Jean-Claude Guillet understood he was needed for his French language skills, but that he was also very expendable. SOE radio men like Guillet were nicknamed piano players for their finger-tapping dexterity with the Morse code transmitter.
The SOE was looking for people, obviously, that had language, definitely the language being French if you're going to be in French territory.
The SOE ran what they called circuits, so Special Operations Executive would drop in various people by parachute, or they would land in isolated fields in Normandy and Brittany and drop agents off. Sometimes they dropped as many as 5 people at one time, sometimes just single agents.
How dangerous is it to be an SOE agent? It is extremely dangerous. If you are captured, you're going to be tortured.
Paris was a city with a smoldering purpose. Signs in an alien tongue stood isolated. An alien flag flapped in the breeze.
In France, the resistance began to fight back starting early in 1943 and into 1944. However, these civilian groups were operating independently. There were many French political factions just out for themselves. The mission of Jean-Claude's small circuit of SOE agents was to change this. That was because one of the most critical battles in world history was about to occur, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, France. The SOE and French resistance would need to play a crucial role behind the scenes in central France in early June 1944, but they had to be brought together in their efforts. This Special Operations Executive mission to unify the French resistance was labeled Salesman 2. A couple of months before D-Day, a previous Salesman mission in Normandy involving 3 other members of Jean-Claude's new circuit had failed. It was broken up by the Gestapo, and the team's radio operator was arrested.
4,000 ships, combat and landing craft carry the war to the enemy by sea. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Forces land hundreds of thousands of British, Canadians, and Yanks on Hitler's doorstep. This is the supreme moment of invasion. Each hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead.
On June 6th, 1944, the Allies invaded Normandy, France to begin the eventual liberation of Western Europe from Nazi oppression. After the D-Day landings were announced, Allied Supreme Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower called on the French resistance, also known as the Maquis, to join the fight.
All patriots, men and women, young and old, have a part to play in the achievement of final victory. To members of resistance movements, follow the instructions you have received.
Any German counterattack in Normandy would need the support of tanks and troops from all over Europe. German divisions were ordered to head to the Normandy coast. Salesman 2's mission was to slow down one of Germany's top battle groups heading towards Normandy from southern France.
And then at about 9 o'clock, the Violette rushed in, yelling ahead out, saying, well, the landing, D-Day, did that.
Bob Maloubier was one of the Special Operations executive agents assigned to the Salesman 2 circuit with Jean-Claude Guillet. All 4 Salesman 2 agents had specific roles for their upcoming mission in central France. The team was also categorized as F Section, the designation for France.
Everyone had only code names. Everyone only knew each other through their code names and through their cover stories. The obvious reasoning is that if someone was captured and tortured and cracked, then they would be able to spill truth about other agents.
French historian Eric Simon is one of the world's leading experts on the French resistance, Maquis, and the SOE's Salesman 2 team, which included one American, Jean-Claude Guillet.
Jean-Claude Guillet, who was not only the radio transmitter, but he was a man who was also in charge of a dropping zone.
He's a Yank, but he speaks perfect French. His name is Jean-Claude Guillet. Originally was French.
If you are a piano player, radio transmitter, we give you 2 months before being caught by the German.
He was the only new addition because the radio man on their last mission had been captured, tortured, and killed.
Bob Maloubier was absolutely the military expert of the mission, an expert in explosives. He was the best one ever, and he was in charge of training the Maquis. And the head of the mission, the leader, the group leader, was Philippe Liver.
Bob Maloubier was 6 months older than my father.
That was a one-man wrecking crew.
They sacrificed greatly for each other. They protected each other. But they were still distant because they knew that either one of them wasn't going to come back from some demolition, some ambush, some hike, some patrol.
These are citizen soldiers.
The third member of the team was a lady named Violette Szabo. Louis was her boss and team leader at that point.
Spent a lot of her childhood in France and was therefore fluent, knew her way around how to operate in France, etc. She was witty, she was funny, she was a live wire, very optimistic, very hopeful, very buoyant character, great human spirit, great strength and courage, really a really beautiful soul.
His teammates were a group of 3 veterans, agents who had done a previous mission in occupied France. So they knew each other well. He was the new person attached to the team. He fit perfectly, and he enjoyed each and every one of his teammates. He was by far the youngest, having just turned 20 when he was doing this mission.
So, the Salesman 2 team would be Bob Maloubier, SOE's top demolition expert and saboteur, born in France. His code name was Paco. Violette Szabo, the courier, beautiful, 22 years old, and 5 foot 3 inches tall, born in Paris and moved to London at 11 years old. Her code name was Corinne. Philippe Liver, the mission's key organizer, was born in Paris in 1911. Liver joined the SOE in 1942. His code name was Major Staunton, or Hamlet. Jean-Claude Guillet was the radio operator, the only American on the team, barely 20 years old. Code name, Virgil.
Wireless men were in big demand, in part because they were so short-lived. If you have a 3, 4, 5 week life expectancy, there was a lot of turnover.
This is Katza. How do you do?
The SOE and Resistance Network called for special weapons in World War II. For example, the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife was designed for very close and personal combat, quick and silent killing. The muted Wellrod pistol was also a favorite among Special Operations executive agents. Even today, the British won't admit their agents used the secret gun. The Wellrod was preferred for close-up assassinations and quiet ambushes. The number of small items used by the SOE to kill, wound, or maim Germans in occupied France was endless, from special commando knives to guns that shot just a single bullet. The one-shot Liberator pistol was used to capture a better weapon owned by a German.
Everything shot bullets, fountain pens, a cigar with a .25 caliber bullet still in it, cigarettes with tiny bullets. You pull the string between your teeth and it fires one shot.
As they were developing SOE, they would have agents put exploding bicycle air pumps that would snap onto the Nazis' bicycles. And so they would go and they'd find the Nazis in a cafe or a bar. They'd switch out the pump and let the air out of a tire. They would snap on their exploding pump, and the Nazi would come out from lunch or rest or coffee, whatever, and see he had a flat tire, take it off and get his pump out and push it, and he'd lose two hands.
Occupied Europe starts with resistance, but it was really hard going to resist an occupying army that would kill a large number of people for any infraction of their decrees. There are decrees here, if a telephone line is cut, 50 people will be killed. Well, do you really want to cut the telephone line? Tiny spy gadgets, like very tiny cameras inside matchboxes, cameras inside a cigarette lighter, and guns inside cigarette lighters, guns inside everything.
This was the top-secret agent world that American Jean-Claude Guillet was now a part of. All special operations executive activities were run out of this nondescript building in London, 64 Baker Street. The building was called the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Its agents known as irregulars, a reference to characters in the Sherlock Holmes books. The entire Salesman 2 four-person team was issued fake ID cards before departing for France.
They changed his name and used his original birth date, but changed the year. And they aged him 7 years on the forged ID so that he would have had the ability to have served in the French army early in the war and therefore had been discharged. And he had forged discharge papers so that he was able to show those to the Nazis when he was stopped.
Immediately following the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, the SOE intended to drop the Salesman 2 team into central France to slow up German divisions ordered to counterattack the landing beaches in Normandy. The mission would take the four agents to a part of south-central France called the Limousin region.
The city of Limoges is the center, is also called the capital of the Maquis, only because of its geographical position. We're not too far from Paris. We're along these great train lines and just its geographical situation.
Their mission that the SOE team that he was on went in to do was very straightforward in a complex way. They were to go into an area around Limoges in south central France and organize resistance groups that they knew were in existence.
That area was significant near Limoges because that's where the German troops from the south would pass through, reinforcements to the Germans in Normandy.
Their mission was to form a civilian army, which would allow them to then organize resistance and slow down. They needed to delay a troop called Das Reich, which was the 2nd Waffen SS armored division with hundreds of Panzer tanks that would be rushed up to the Normandy beaches when the D-Day invasions occurred. The mission was to delay it for 3 days from reaching D-Day invasion beaches in Normandy.
Their main job was to try and help train the resistance in communication, in explosive detonation, in assassination.
The area was a large geographical area and included 6 different departments of France, and each department had their own local Marquis or French resistance group. That was a challenge for them to be able to have command control over. What the Salesman team focused on was controlling the countryside, the small villages, supply routes.
The most critical job of the Salesman 2 team was to bring factions of resistance groups together to fight the Germans. In 1944, Maquis groups in central France were too focused on their internal politics and not enough on defeating the Nazis. The Salesman 2 mission began on the night of June 7th, one day after the landings in Normandy. A darkly painted American-built consolidated B-24 Liberator 4-engine bomber left a secret airfield in England bound for central France. There was a full moon. The plane was stripped down to lighten its load. The 4 Special Operations executive agents on board still did not know the others' real names. Each was focused on their role in this vital mission. In the early morning hours of June 8, 1944, the B-24's important cargo, including Jean-Claude Guillet and his radio transmitter, was dropped at a very low altitude near a quiet and remote French village.
Well, the SOS agents were dropped exactly here, exactly in this field. It's not very far from Susac, and it's where normally the drops were taking place. But this night, it was a very windy night, and there was a Liberator coming from the region of London, and he dropped on the field Violette and Guillet. Then he dropped Maloubier and Staunton, plus some containers with cigarettes, with weapons as well, and so and so. And here, around them, there was nearly the whole village applauding and good, good. They saw all the lights of the car, they were not hidden and so and so. All these people coming with them, hello, welcome to France. The German would never dare to come here. So let's go to Susac, that's where you will stay.
The team's mission, to organize the French resistance into a significant fighting force, was off to an anxious start.
It was disorganized. They didn't know who to trust, who not to trust. And yet they had to go around the region and try to introduce themselves to individual groups of resistors and recruit them.
Not only recruit them, but teach the French civilians how to fight the Germans as a cohesive army.
They would train them in demolition and plastic and shaped charges and how to kill a guard, who they wanted assassinated, which officers should be a priority on the Nazi staff. Their object was to get the Nazis beaten.
The factions in the French resistance, whether communist, socialist, or loyal to Free French leader Charles de Gaulle, could settle their political fate after the Germans were finally beaten in France. Susac was the perfect place for an SOE team to work and hide, but that did not bring comfort to radio man Jean-Claude Guillet. Guillet sent top-secret messages from France via these coded sheets of paper. Outstation was now the village of Susac. Home station was Baker Street in London.
The Germans really valued the information that they could extract from a wireless operator, for the simple reason that the wireless operators knew every bit of information. So he knew he was being hunted. The average life expectancy of a SOE operator was a maximum of 6 weeks.
The Germans were closing in on central France from the south. It was the main route to Normandy. However, before continuing on to the landing beaches, German leadership wanted the French resistance dealt with.
Around Susac, there was the Bremer division and the Jesser division, 2 divisions who were sent here to crush the Maquis.
Thousands of communists leading resistance were operating in the forests and villages around Susac. The new base for Jean-Claude Guillet, Bob Loubier, Philip Luer, and Violette Szabo.
When you go to these places, you enter in narrow roadways. They're not like super highways. They're small country roads and small bridges. There is danger at every turn.
They rubbed up against Nazi soldiers and Vichy troops all the time.
Following their jump, the Salesman II team settled into their primary mission of organizing the French Maquis into one fighting force. The four agents also began individual acts of sabotage to inflict damage on the German infrastructure along the road to Normandy.
There was a lot of transmission about troop movements, train schedules. London would direct them saying, we want you to blow up that building or train.
It was a small village with a local church, a local cafe. Where did they hide their weapon? Oh, it's very simple. In the local churchyard. They opened the tombs and they put the weapons there. This is a very important building. It's the old grocery shop. The owner of the shop in 1944 was Ana Ribeiras. And Ana Ribeiras was nicknamed the mother of the Maquis because she was giving food to the Maquis, she was giving wine, she was giving them a lot of stuff, and she was absolutely a fantastic lady. Before this, some lost American pilots were hidden in this place. Jean-Claude Guillet was living the old butcher shop, the place opposite. And Violette and the two other men were living above the grocery shop. Now, Guillet was the most important man of the mission because he had his transmitter. He has the famous code and the keys to the transmitter.
The BBC had various code messages that could be heard by the French resistance.
Attention, il va pleuvoir bougrement ce soir.
It was illegal to listen to a radio, it was illegal to own a radio in France, but members of the French resistance did have these radio sets, these secret sets.
The German 2nd SS Division, also known as the Das Reich, was feared for its brutality. The division was made up of Hitler fanatics. It already had a reputation for killing civilians, even women and children. The 2nd SS was on its way from southern France to counterattack in Normandy. But en route, they were told to eliminate any French resistance in the Limoges area. On June 8th, the 2nd SS Division found itself in Tulle, France, just south of the Salesman II's newly established base in tiny Soussac.
Tulle is a very small city compared to Limoges, sadly famous for some massacre from 99 people between the age and between 16 and 60 who was arrested. We call it the Massacre of Tulle. In June 1944, the French Communist Party gave an order to all the communist partisans after D-Day to take and free all the small cities, as many as possible. But they forgot one thing, that a very, very good SS division, the Das Reich division, who was coming from the south, this called for reprisal, revenge from the Germans. During the Battle of Tulle, 7th and 8th of June 1944, 35 Germans were killed, about 20 partisans. For one German soldier killed, we will hang 4 people from innocent people from the city of Tulle. A local Gestapo officer who was a very good French speaker, he just with he tried to find the right people to be hung. So the SS asked the city for some ropes. And they were given some ropes, and obviously they hung these people to every balcony until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This is a very sad area. This is the field of the martyr. After the people were hung, they took out the bodies, they put them into lorries. It was the garbage dump of Tulle. So they wanted, at last, at the end even, they wanted to humiliate the people of Tulle and all the dead people who were here.
I think that the reminder that you see with these bullet holes, that town's history. We knew that something of great importance and violence took place there.
On the morning of June 10th, 1944, the Salesman 2 team suffered a significant setback in its overall mission. That's when one of the team's SOE agents and the circuit's designated courier was captured just outside a village named Salon-la-Tour. Once again, it was the German 2nd SS Division.
This is the place where Violette Szabo, SOE agent, was arrested by the SS Das Reich Division. Violette was coming from Susac in a car, which was a terrible mistake, because in those days there was virtually no cars on the road, and we are the 10th. The Maquis didn't know that the SS Panzer Division Das Reich was coming. They see very, very simply 5 or 6 SS. They were blocking the road. And Violette went that way.
The Allies have just invaded France. Everyone's paranoid, neurotic. Things are blowing up everywhere, and you see a 24-year-old young woman with a swarthy-looking French guy, and they look suspicious, and you stop the car. And they were stopped by Germans belonging to the 2nd SS Das Reich Division. And the story goes that Violette Szabo ran across a field. She had a Sten gun on her, and she ran, and then she ended up, being shot at, and she fired back, and she was behind a tall tree and returned fire several times.
She was arrested exactly in one of these fields here. She was taken here by the German. She was interrogated, raped many, many times by the Gestapo. This is where Violette was taken after being arrested by the SS at Salon-la-Tour. Violette stays no more than 4 to 5 days here. Then she was transferred to Paris.
Philippe Luer had planned to rescue Violette Szabo while she was en route from the prison to nearby Gestapo headquarters in Limoges. But before any plans were executed, Szabo was transferred to Gestapo headquarters in Paris. She arrived at the infamous Avenue Foch.
Avenue Foch is right in the heart of Paris. So the gangsters moved in. There were detectives that worked for the Gestapo, there were intelligence officers, and they all moved into several buildings on Avenue Foch in the fall of 1940. You had the most evil mass murderers in modern European history living on that one street. It was the center of the SS and Gestapo activities in France. It was where the French resistance were tortured and brutalized and murdered more than anywhere else in France.
Violette Szabo was held in cell number 45 and tortured for 7 weeks here at 84 Avenue Foch. She was then sent to Germany. Violette never talked. To the frustration of German leadership, the Salesman 2 team had quickly unified French resistance groups into one force. To deal with this, Nazi leadership in central France decided to violently punish the families of resistance fighters and local French civilians. The Tulle massacre had already happened. The Germans decided to ratchet up the level of death and destruction even more. Another very small village not too far from Susac, named Oradour-sur-Glane, was targeted.
There was an order from the High German headquarters in France: you must crush the French resistance. Do not hesitate to terrorize the population. That's what Oradour was chosen. The 19th century building was, in the days of 1944, it was where Heinz Lammerding, the general at the head of the Das Reich, stayed on the 9th of June. And it's in his room that the fate of Oradour was sealed. It was a very quiet village, a little village. You can see old people, you can see women, you can see babies. Even babies were killed here by the Germans. The men who were heading the SS division were absolutely the most faithful servant to Hitler.
It was a tactic of trying to get the resistance out of business because they were so efficient.
When the remaining members of the Salesman 2 team heard what had happened, they raced to Oradour-sur-Glane. 643 civilians in Oradour were dead. The men were shot in barns. 450 women and children burned alive in this church. The entire village, now preserved, was burned to the ground.
My father was one of the first to arrive, and he took 4 pictures of it, which are hard to look at to this day. Then they ran back off to Saussac, to the camp. Those pictures were eventually released and were the first photographs of the actual massacre that the French civilians ever saw.
It was extremely important to gather much evidences and information about the massacre of Oradour as possible. In 1945, General de Gaulle said, Oradour must stay as it is. It is a symbol of your oppression of France.
It's frozen in time. Oradour-sur-Glane became the most notorious atrocity committed by the Germans in occupied France after D-Day.
When we were there in 2001, we were within 15 kilometers of the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. And I said, Dad, do you want to go? He looked at me and he said, no. Matter of fact, I'd like you to turn around.
Oradour-sur-Glane.
The massacres at Oradour and Tulle, and dealing with SOE sabotage and resistance attacks, had dramatically slowed the progress of the German 2nd SS Division. They were well behind schedule to counterattack the Allies in Normandy. After the D-Day landing, Salesman 2 continued its mission of working with and reinforcing the French resistance.
On June 25th, 1944, they had a very large airdrop that my dad arranged. It was the first daytime airdrop in Europe. This turned out to be 860 containers from 72 planes.
Frequent supply drops sent from England became a specialty for the Salesman 2 team. However, the drops also began attracting German attention, especially one day in July when parachutes decorated with the French flag's blue, white, and red tricolors dropped from the sky.
The supply drop in July was something absolutely fantastic. There was about 100 persons waiting for it. Guillet said, we use this field, and the plane came. Do you imagine the noise? And it was the 14th of July, the national celebration of the revolution in France.
They stood up in a line, standing at attention, singing, broke into song of the national anthem, the Marseillaise. And sure enough, the next day, a troop of over 6,000 Nazis started to invade their region, doing a cleanup under direct orders from Hitler to clean up this rat's nest of resistance that they were. And it turned into a huge battle.
That big fight began on July 17th and involved resistance fighters trained and supplied by the Salesman 2 team. It became known as the Battle of Mount Gargon. The resistance had the high ground on a 2,400-foot peak. German soldiers and some 500 vehicles arrived in the valley, and a 7-day battle began. 342 Germans were killed. Only 47 of the Maquis died. It was an intense fight, one of the most important in the history of the resistance. It was also a baptism under fire for Jean-Claude Guillet.
The numbers can be 4,000 to 5,000 is what was estimated, with a group of 500 French resistors. And he found himself, by being de facto appointed by the French resistors, because he was an American and because they assumed that he had all kinds of special training and combat experience, when in fact this was his first battle. And if you look at a picture of my dad when he signed up with OSS in October of 1943, and you look at him 9 months later in August in Limoges of 44, you cannot believe the age that occurred.
The Das Reich Division was quickly using up its resources dealing with Jean-Claude Guillet's SOE team and the local resistance.
Then you look at the type of demolition was done towards trains. It was to completely cut off the Atlantic Wall Command from the rest of the country.
Trains were very important because tanks, like big Panzer tanks, were usually moved by flat car trains. Bob, at some points, would go out 8 or 9 times a night and blow up trains. My father doing the same at that point. The Limoges area was a cross section, and that's why it was so critically important. It had 2 sets of rails running north-south from Paris to the south of France, and it had 2 sets of tracks running east-west. The Salesman team, they shut down virtually 100% of the train traffic in about 6 weeks after their arrival.
Jean-Claude Guillet's smarts and proficiency in French saved him many times during his time in France with the SOE, as did the expert work of those at Special Operations Executive on Baker Street, who created Salesman 2's fake identity cards and documents. There were many close encounters for the American.
He heard a German convoy driving along the road, and he knew there was no place to run. The Nazi commander says, well, let me see your papers, and what's your name? And so my father told him it was Claude Jean Guillet, his cover name, and pulled out his French ID card that had been forged in London. They asked for some other documents that he had with him, and he presented them, and they gave it a look and said, okay, that's fine.
All the training provided by the Salesman 2 team was finally paying off for the French resistance in central France following D-Day. An organized fighting force of 10,000 men, women, and children had been established.
What the French civilians needed was a structure, and once Louis had central command of it, he could orchestrate complex maneuvers of hitting a train, pivoting, hitting a different train, blowing up a couple bridges on the way, and then attacking a barracks.
The resistance had finally come together to fight the Germans, and not each other.
There was no more communist, there was no more Gaullist, there was no more socialist. There was Force Française de l'Intérieur, FFI. They were all working together to liberate France.
A major victory for the resistance came with the taking of Limoges, ground zero for the Maquis in central France. The Germans surrendered the city to the local French resistance and the Salesman 2's SOE team on August 21st, 1944. Some 4 days before Paris was liberated by the French 2nd Armored Division and America's 4th Infantry Division.
This is the memorial dedicated to the people who lost their life in the Second World War. It's also dedicated mainly to the people of the French resistance in Limoges. Limoges, capitale du Maquis. Limoges, capital of the resistance.
Following the liberation of Limoges, in an open square just steps from the prison that once held Violette Szabo, Jean-Claude Guillet, Bob Maloubier, and Philippe Luer were awarded medals pinned on by the French. After the liberation of Limoges and the harassing attacks on the 2nd SS Division ended, Salesman 2's mission was complete. There was time for a short celebration before the remaining 3 Salesman 2 agents headed in different directions. Jean-Claude Guillet's time in Europe as an SOE agent with the Salesman 2 circuit was over.
The mission has been closed down. They immediately drove into Paris. He had just a few days to be with Bob Maloubier, who had a family home in Paris. They celebrated. They had a wonderful time, along with Philippe Luer. So the 3 out of 4 of the team members survived that mission. London gave him his choice of go home to Northampton, Massachusetts for a 2-week Christmas break. He said, send me home. And he never got a chance to say goodbye to either Bob or Phil Luer.
For their captured Salesman 2 teammate, Violette Szabo, the end came in Germany. After leaving Paris in a dirty and overcrowded train car, Szabo arrived at a women's-only prison facility in northern Germany.
She was sent to a concentration camp.
She was taken out on the 5th of February 1945 at Ravensbrück. She was 24 years old, and they shot her in the back of the head.
Violette Szabo's name remains legendary in special agent circles. The 2nd SS Panzer Division finally arrived in Normandy on June 12th, 6 days too late to help stop the Allied invasion. Their time spent murdering and terrorizing the civilian population around Limoges also factored into the failure of Das Reich.
My father felt that the Salesman 2 mission that he was on exceeded the wildest hopes and dreams of Baker Street and the team members. They hoped to delay the arrival of Das Reich by 3 days. It was a shell of a remnant that actually arrived at Normandy. And so they did their job. According to other leaders, the actions that they had in the Limoges area were responsible for probably shortening the war by 3 to 5 months, which is a very significant achievement. Every SOE agent I ever met would automatically say, I was only doing my job. The real heroes were the guys on the landing craft on D-Day.
The Salesman 2 team and the French resistance are celebrated to this day in central France. A museum in Limoges displays the tools of the SOE and resistance trade. Photos and artifacts document a time when an American and 3 French special agents dropped into the Soussac area, rallied the French resistance, and in the process, helped save the D-Day landings in Normandy. There was a heavy price to pay for freedom in France.
Twice a year, the schools let out and they celebrate the SOE, and they go to monuments and they put flowers and they have speeches and ribbons, and they've learned their history.
A history brought to light by a curious son, determined to learn more about his father's own role in World War II.
So the tin bread box was the foundation of the first idea that there was something more to my father. He was something different.